Hello, everyone, and welcome to Chatty AF, the Anime Feminist podcast. My name is Vrai Kaiser. I'm an editor and contributor for Anime Feminist, and you can find the stuff I do on Twitter at WriterVry, and the other podcast I co-host at TrashPod.
Hi, I'm Caitlin. I am a staff writer and editor for Anime Feminist. I also have my own feminist blog, heroineproblem.com, heroine with an E, where I talk a lot about shoujo manga in particular.
Hi, I'm Dee Hogan. I'm the managing editor at Anime Feminist. I also run the anime blog The Josei Next Door, and you can find me on Twitter at Josei Next Door.
And this is a podcast I have been begging to do for a very long time. This is a series retrospective on The Woman Called Fujiko Mine, which came out in 2012 by TMS, and is probably in my top 5, if not my top 3 all-time anime.
It is on my short list of actually feminist anime. I've talked about before how my standards for what I will call feminist are very, very particular. And The Woman Called Fujiko Mine definitely meets those.
What can you, for listeners, who don't know kind of the standards there, how do you decide that?
It has to specifically address how women are treated in some way. You can't just gloss over it with like, she is living happily in this world where she has equal opportunities. It has to specifically address the realities that women in the world live with and deal with, or how they're presented in media. Other series another series I call feminist is Revolutionary Girl Utena, Maria the Virgin Witch.
We should do a podcast on that one at some point too.
Oh man, that would be really good. Not enough people have seen that. I feel like there are other ones, but they're not coming to mind right at the moment.
Yeah, it's a short list.
It is. It's a very short list.
Yeah, this is a very unusual anime, and these two, bless their hearts, are going to indulge me now while I spool out for you listeners a kind of potted history of how this anime came to be. Because Lupin III is a very, very old franchise. The manga began in 1967, and it was first developed into an anime. In fact, the first attempt to do an anime aimed at adult audiences in 1971. So, The Woman Called Fujiko Mine was conceived for the 40th anniversary of the premiere of the television anime. And it didn't quite make it. It's about 4 months off. The 71 Green Jacket started in October of 1971, and Fujiko Mine aired in the spring season of 2012. And it is quite unusual because it's very unlike, in some ways, the rest of the franchise. It very much harkens back to the designs of the first couple volumes of the manga by Monkey Punch. It has that very dark aesthetic, and it has the dark kind of mentality of the earliest manga, which most people don't think of because later incarnations of the series got increasingly lighter and PG-13 and kind of shenanigansy, but the first couple volumes of the manga are dark and cruel and kind of sadistic, and so are the earliest episodes of the anime, and I think people kind of forget that.
Mm-hmm. It's definitely been more of a family thing for several decades.
Like, Hayao Miyazaki actually, in his first anime gig, came onto Green Jacket halfway through because they just did not know what they were doing with it. And from that point in time, Green Jackets shifted from being a kind of weird, dark, psychedelic thing, which is what Fujiko Mine is drawing from, into being very family-friendly heists, like the Castle of Cagliostro, which I also like very much, don't get me wrong, but it's a very different tone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And Woman Called Fujiko Mine is also interesting because the Lupin franchise is not known for its adventurousness. Or rather, it's become known for kind of a stay-at-ness, because the original series, the original manga, and Green Jacket were both kind of adventurous in that, it was the first manga for adult, or the first anime for adults. It shifted and became that Miyazaki thing halfway through, so it was trying to do a lot of different things and change the landscape of anime. Secret of Mamo, the first Lupin film, is very different from Castle of Cagliostro, which is different from Lupin III Part 2, which is the 150 episode one that everybody remembers, which is different from New Lupin III, which isn't a good series, but wow, it is weird and interesting to look at if you want a potted time capsule of the 80s, and I kind of love it.
That's Pink Jacket?
That is Pink Jacket, which is just the ugliest thing ever put onto an animation cell. It's hideous, but it's interesting in its hideousness. And then a very bad thing happened, which is that TMS made this OVA called Plot of the Fuma Clan, or the Fuma Conspiracy is the English release, which I highly recommend picking up, especially if you enjoy Castle of Cagliostro. It's really super charming and cheap. But in the process of making this OVA, TMS poured all of their money into the animation budget, which is really pretty, like feature pretty. And they fired Yuji Ono, who was the composer for Part 2 and Part 3, and hired somebody else, and also fired all of the legacy voice actors who'd been doing this for literally over a decade.
Wow.
And yeah, unsurprisingly, fans boycotted it, and it didn't do well. But TMS did not take from this, hey, maybe treat your cast with respect and dignity. They learned from this, never do anything new and interesting ever. Lupin fans always want you to do the same thing. And so pretty much everything from the late 80s onward is kind of this slow slide into samey mediocrity, which wasn't helped by the fact that it became this event where you would have a summer TV movie every year, which got super rote really quickly. So when Fujiko Mine came out, it was a major change. It had these new character designs. Yuji Ono did not do the soundtrack. And it is the first and still the only time that the series has had a woman as either the director or the head writer. Which I have... I went to look it up because I had assumed that this series also didn't do well. It's very much a cult hit over in the United States, but the DVD set charted for its first week in the top 10. Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
I think it makes sense because I had somehow had the impression that it didn't do very well in Japan. Mm-hmm. Maybe because Sayo Yamamoto didn't get a chance to direct her own show for quite a while. Mm-hmm. But it did revitalize Lupin. Like, it took a series that had been stagnant for a very long time, and it brought in this new energy that has transferred to the incarnation since then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Is it Blue Jacket now? Yeah, Part 4. Blue Jacket came out, I guess, a couple years ago at this point.
Yeah, 2015. It's fine.
And you can very much feel the kind of jazzy style of Fujiko Mine. Like it carried over the aesthetic while kind of toning it back to that more family friendly shenanigans tone of the earlier Lupin incarnations, I think.
Yeah, which it does kind of depress me that Blue Jacket is fine. I kind of like either the darker or the super cute, gentle variations on Lupin, and everything in between is kind of okay. Mm-hmm. But there were 2 movies that used the same designs from Fujiko Mine, but had a different writer, and they are unpleasant. Jigen Daisuke's Gravestone is really unpleasant. Like, there's this whole sequence where Fujiko is naked and covered in like oil and menaced by a rape robot, and
wow,
I'll avoid super that. Awful. It's bad. It's kind of gay, but there are gayer series. Every Jigen backstory is kind of gay.
Yeah.
But, so I don't know if you can tell, but I'm kind of a big fan of this franchise. I haven't seen all of it, but I've seen probably about half of what's collectively out there. And like I said, I prefer the really dark, weird stuff, and also the sort of Miyazaki-leaning, the Miyazaki-leaning, really gentle stuff, because those tend to be the versions that at least do the most interesting things with female characters.
Yeah, it's interesting because out of all the characters, Fujiko is the one whose role in the narrative shifts a lot, depending on the director and the writer's own feelings about women.
Yeah, well, and some of that is from the manga. Like, originally Fujiko wasn't even a character. She was a joke that every woman that Lupin met was called Fujiko Mine, which is partly what was taken from for this anime of why she has so many different backstories, but then that was eventually coalesced into one character who's written with no consistency whatsoever.
Her name also means
Twin Peaks.
Yeah,
it's a titty joke.
It's a boob joke. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a great start. Great start for this feminist anime we're talking about.
Yeah, right?
Yeah,
Well, this is a story of overcoming.
I'm so disappointed that the stuff after this anime kind of just has shown signs of sliding right back into mediocrity. Because, like I said, Blue Jacket is fine, but there were those two really unpleasant movies. There hasn't been another female director or female head writer, and it's not like there's a shortage of them in anime. And also, the 50th anniversary project is just remakes of stuff from the original anime and the manga with like an anthology style of different animators. And it's boring, thanks, I don't want it.
Yeah.
I'm sorry about that. Part 5's coming out in a few weeks, right? Isn't it spring season?
Yes, that's part of the spring season.
Yeah.
So, I know you guys know a little bit of Lupin, but where are you at with this series?
So I have seen Castle of Cagliostro. I watched episode 0.
The gayest one, good.
Which, like The Woman Called Fujiko Mine, is an origin story. In case the name didn't tell you everything. And I've seen scattered episodes on Adult Swim. My knowledge is not super extensive. Like I know the background, I know the mythology. I know that Lupin and Jigen are pretty much husbands. Listen.
It's a harem. It is a full-on thief harem, and it's extremely good. Sorry, I have feelings.
That's pretty much the extent of it.
How about you, Dee?
So I had technically seen Castle of Cagliostro before Fujiko Mine came out. But we had like a big Miyazaki movie day, and it was wedged somewhere in the middle, and we were hanging out and chatting, and so I liked it, but I didn't have it didn't really leave a strong impression or anything, because I had no context for the characters or really anything about it.
Right.
And then Fujiko Mine came out that spring of 2012, which was, streaming anime was really kind of starting to take off, sort of end of 2011, beginning of 2012. So I actually watched that one week to week on Funimation's website as it was airing.
Wow.
Without really any knowledge of the franchise. Like, I knew it existed, but I didn't really, I honestly didn't even know the characters. Like, Goemon showed up and I was like, oh, he's like a franchise character, I guess. I was completely blind, more or less. Because again, I didn't really remember Cagliostro either. So since Fujiko Mine, I have seen Cagliostro again. It's a great movie. Fujiko's very good in it, by the way.
She's so good.
I really like her in that movie. Yeah, I watched it when it came through in theaters this past year. I got to see it on the big screen, which was very cool. And then I watched Part 4 when it came out, so I've seen Blue Jacket as well. It was fun. I enjoyed it. There were some episodes I really, really liked and others that were pretty meh. The ending got too damsel-y for my tastes, but it was fine.
Yeah, that's the Lupin experience, pretty much. I will briefly say that on the subject of this coming out kind of at the beginning of the streaming boom, it's basically revitalized Lupin's existence here in the States because of all kinds of legal shenanigans. It never really got a foothold here before that, so that's something to be grateful for. The reason Discotek has had such success in slowly, dedicatedly bringing over every aspect of the franchise and putting it all on Crunchyroll, you have this anime to thank.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's just a whole other podcast in the legal shenanigans surrounding this series and the fact that it's fan fiction. So, we can't go down that road. There's already so much to talk about here.
I was going to say, there's a lot to talk about with the show proper, so.
This is very much a show about awful people doing awful things, and this is going to be a full spoiler cast, so if you haven't seen the series, I would highly recommend doing so before you listen any further. It's a big twist-based series. And I do want to warn that this series has multiple content warnings, a lot, for sexual...
We'll tag it on the podcast post itself, too.
Yeah. But just for reference, if you're thinking about watching it after having heard this first 20 minutes, it's got child sexual assault, psychological torture, physical torture, a lot of psychedelia, and
Just
memory.
just Oscar calling Fujiko awful names.
The Oscar is a little shit and also my boy. He's the worst. He is like the embodiment of internalized misogyny.
Yeah, this is kind of a show about assholes, with a few exceptions. I think Jigen's actually a pretty decent dude throughout this, and obviously Goemon is a big moe ball of goof. So,
Oh, Moemon.
Oh, Goemon.
Even Moemon's got like the biggest virgin horror complex.
Yeah.
oh yeah,
like, it's-
no, he's not a perfect character by any stretch, but he's kind of likable in that he's just very. You get the sense he's just so naive that he doesn't even realize that he's kind of putting Fujiko on this pedestal.
So a lot of people, I did want to talk briefly that this is the way a lot of people became familiar with Yamamoto, myself included, because it was due to the success of this series that Michiko and Hachin was even brought over. So how is what was it like to come back to this, I guess, after like Yuri on Ice took over the world?
It does have like, I know she doesn't like having Yuri on Ice sort of compared to her previous works. You see shades of Fujiko Mine's themes in Yuri on Ice. I don't know if I would say the other way around, because Yuri on Ice is a much more positive series in general. There is a very strong sense of anger that comes from both Yamamoto and Okada. I think Mario Okada was the writer.
No, Mario Okada was the writer, and I feel her handprints all over this thing.
Yeah.
Very much. Yeah, it's
I did an interview with her. You can read it on the site if you haven't. I recommend it because
With Yamamoto,
she gave some,
not Okada.
Yes, with
just to
Yamamoto.
clarify.
Because she gave me some really cool answers. So, when she made this show, Moe was still going very strong. And most shows that featured female characters were sort of these pre-molded archetypes. And that was really frustrating for her, having to deal with it. And, so she wanted to make something with more honest and kind of uncomfortable depictions of women, and something with more authentic sexuality to it.
Right.
Which, you can still see like the honest sexuality in Yuri on Ice. You can see in some of the secondary female characters the frustration, the same sort of frustration with male expectations that is all over the place in Fujiko Mine.
and purely visually, there's also the Playboy sequence in Yuri on Ice with the cutout, the black the black silhouettes was
Right.
first utilized here.
And a lot of emphasis, like subtle body language, and a lot of showing, not telling.
Yeah, boy, this show. I mean, maybe I'm biased because I wrote a lot about this show, but it definitely
Same.
benefits from repeat watchings.
Absolutely.
I am amused by the fact that in an interview, I think it was the one that Wave Motion Canon translated, she mentioned that when she was offered the anniversary project, she wasn't necessarily interested in Lupin as a character, and she only wanted to do it if she could look at Fujiko a lot. I love her so much. She also did mention that she was the head of this project, but it was very much Okada's baby, which I find, like you said, Dee, her handprints are all over this,
Yeah.
especially with Oscar.
Oscar
I feel
and
like.
and I think Aisha at the end. You can
Very
kind
much.
of feel it, especially some of the stuff with her relationship with her family and her mom, especially knowing now that Okada's come out with her biography, and we know that her home situation was very rough growing up. I think you see a lot of those themes in her work.
Yeah, the thing I always would say is, like, you watch Mario Okada's work and you say, who hurt you?
Yeah.
And then you look at her autobiography and you say, oh, everyone.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of rawness in it. But I think she tries to find, I think most of her work that I've seen still kind of tries to find like that light at the end of the tunnel. Which I think you even see with Fujiko Mine, although it's maybe a little bit dimmer in some aspects.
Yeah, and Okada gets dinged a lot for being melodramatic. I think it's popular to kind of poke fun at her for that, and I think that's can be true when she does grounded series, but it's really at home here with the stylized kind of
It
story
works
structure.
very well, and just the statement that the show is making, because this is a show that has something to say.
It has a thought about a feminism, which is a good way as any to segue into the visual design, which one of the first things you learn about this show is a lot of people were turned off because there's a lot of boobs. My
There are
God,
all
there's
the
so
boobs.
many boobs.
All
There's
the
a lot
boobs
of
are in this
boobs.
show.
Every boob is in this series,
Every single boob.
which
That's
leads to
why-
a lot.
That's why they're not in the other anime, is because they're all here.
Yeah, and I think it confuses people who haven't seen the series why this is talked about as being very feminist, because what do you mean? She's naked all the time. That is not a feminism. And, you can't say that the very streamlined, very disproportionate noodle designs are exactly like,
Stylized.
yes, they're stylized, but like they're not like not even like Michiko and Hachin, which has like very realistically proportioned women in it. But honestly, I'm so in love with the way this series portrays Fujiko specifically, but women in general. This is one of the few times I have ever found an anime like genuinely attractive. Like Fujiko is a very sexy character, because there's a specificity to the framing. When she is naked, most of the time, she is choosing to be naked in those scenes. She has the power in that situation. And often she makes the people around her uncomfortable with her body rather than being there to be ogled at in that sort of, she doesn't mind that she's naked, like way that you see in a lot of moe anime at the time. It's not, gosh, she just doesn't know that it's not okay to not wear clothes and dudes drool all over her. No, this is very specifically, this is my body and I have power and I have the choice of what I want to do with it in the situation. And it's a unique feeling.
It's like when I'm just walking around my apartment naked just because I don't feel like putting on clothes.
And there are so many boobs, but you almost become desensitized to the nonchalance with which they're shown in a very deliberate way that I find interesting.
And her body is rarely shown without her face. And when it is usually through the lens of a male character. It's something that I think is very interesting. Because the show does engage with the concept of the gaze and the power of looking a lot, I think. I mean, the first time we see her, it is literally through Lupin's eyes. So when she's just chilling out, being Fujiko, being naked, it is very neutral. When she is when she is trying to use her feminine wiles to get what she wants, or there is a dude looking at her, that is when it kind of focuses on her body without her whole face.
Yeah, and the costume design too. Yamamoto's work, I can't imagine how it must be for the character designers, but her characters very famously wear a lot of outfits. And what's interesting about Fujiko's to me is that all of her clothes are really practical, unless she's specifically trying to get somebody to sleep with her. Like, they're always cute. She mentions in an interview looking at 60s Elle magazine stuff for fashion. Her clothes are really cute, but they're also very practical for heists. Like, these are things that she could move around in. And in what I think might be the most magnificent murder I can think of, she wears the famous cat suit that Fujiko became, iconically linked with, when she is beginning to have a mental breakdown and lose her sense of identity. And that is the most cold-blooded murder I've ever seen in my entire life.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Oh,
I did not
geez,
know
yeah.
that about the cat suit. I thought it was obnoxious that she had it zipped so low, and now I know why.
That's her
That's the
classic
most-
outfit.
It's stone cold murder, and it's amazing. I'm always surprised by people who say that this series, I think it shifted a lot, and this is no shade on just people who are like, this series tonally didn't work for me. I prefer the more lighthearted parts of the franchise. That's fine. But there are a lot of specifically dude bro Lupin fans who are like, this isn't a real Lupin series. It sucks, and it's grim, dark, and edgy, and all like. This series is chock full of like both visual and thematic references to the franchise. They did their research.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's definitely coming from a place of someone who is familiar with the series, someone who has paid attention to the series, and someone who really just wants to talk about Fujiko for a while.
And it's great. And just the very idea of centering your entire concept about the fact that this is an inconsistently written character that nobody actually gives a shit about, except as an object and or prize and or rival, in relation to other people. Who is she when she's alone? Nobody knows. Nobody cared.
Right. Fujiko at her worst was just a damsel or a sex object. Even at her most interesting, she was the sneaky, untrustworthy woman that you can't trust, that, like, it's because she's a woman. It's not because of who she is. She's duplicitous because of her gender.
Yeah,
I really like her depiction in Castle of Cagliostro, because I don't think those qualities are present. I think she comes across as kind of a rival, sort of ally character who kind of goes out of her way to help this other girl out, and I really like that. Also, the scene where she's reporting and just turns around and clubs a guy in the face and then just keeps on reporting is maybe the best scene in that movie. So
it's so good, and it's weird because like her relationship with Clarice is so kind of cute and refreshing, and it feels like it should be in response to the specials that came after, despite it coming before, because so often the annual TV movies will set up Fujiko as a contrast to the good girl who Lupin is trying to woo in this particular go-round. Which sucks!
Yeah, I was going to say, that's not good. But yeah, no, I was just sorry. So we were trying to talking about how, like, the way Fujiko was portrayed in other stuff. And I was like, well, I really like her in Cagliostro, so.
Yeah.
Miyazaki does great with her. His run on Red Jacket has an absolutely fantastic Fujiko sequence where she gets kidnapped and then just kicks a dude in the face, steals his machine gun, and like mows down an entire ship full of armed guards while just like wearing a typical like island sarong. It's amazing.
I'm absolutely shocked that you guys are saying that Miyazaki wrote a woman well. He is not
known
for that at all.
Fair point.
But speaking of Miyazaki, I know that Caitlin, you wanted to talk about Lupin and Fujiko's relationship, and I think Miyazaki's version is the closest to what's going on here.
Yes, I think so. I haven't seen a lot of Miyazaki episodes, but just going by going by Castle of Cagliostro, there is a very real like affection there. She works independent of him. She works alongside with him when it suits her, but like there is a sense that like there is genuine, like, I don't know, maybe I'm just being a romantic, but I think like they do like love each other and they know each other really well and they care about each other. They just, neither of them is particularly very good. Fujiko in particular is not super inclined to working together with people unless there is absolutely definitely something for her to gain. It's been a while since I've watched Lupin, but there's not tension there the same way there is in this. Mm-hmm. But there is a sense that they are friends, that they love each other, and they just kind of do their own thing and occasionally get in each other's way, but also occasionally help each other out.
Yeah, Miyazaki tends to favor that, like, a more sexless version of that kind of playful rivalry. But I think it's similar to what's going on here. Is like, I think Yamamoto called it them enjoying each other, which is a lovely phrase.
Yeah. I think it eventually gets to that point. I don't think that's where it is in the early episodes. I think the series sort of, because early on, especially, Lupin like very much sort of treats her as an object that he's going to take. I mean, pretty casually gropes her during the Phantom of the Opera episode, and she is not happy about that, which I'm pretty sure is why she then sends him to his possible death in the next episode. But again, there's that too. Like, she is more than happy to have Jigen and Lupin kill each other so she can get a stone bird.
But at the same time, the scene with them in the pool earlier in the episode.
I think what it's there, like, there is always kind of a tentative mutual respect fairly early on, but it's not like a genuine affection until much later in the series.
I would agree with that because there's a certain callousness in the way they treat each other early on that I think by the time they part ways in those final 2 episodes is no longer there. But again, I find them both to be kind of assholes in the early going. I don't think
Well,
it's
they are
everywhere.
assholes.
So
They are assholes. I mean, we had this discussion a little bit earlier. Like, they are 100% morally gray. Like, they are not good guys. They are self-serving thieves. And
Yeah, Fujiko's a bad person, y'all. She's very interesting and I like her, but all of these people are bad people. Except maybe Moemon. Even him, he has been an assassin for hire for like a long time.
They have a long history of being likable, and they're familiar characters, but they're not good people. They're not nice people. They are not people who I would want to hang out with.
I do feel like we have to talk about the one place where the series kind of shows its strings a little bit with the legacy characters. I hate this version of Zenigata. Like, I get why it is what it is, because the series needs it to be that way to work. And, like, early Zenigata is an asshole, but it's the biggest departure from he's the goofy dad. He's dad. Why is dad being a creep?
Yeah, and I hear that one a lot. I'm not super fussed over it because I see the role he plays within the narrative and why they needed him to be like that, and why classic Zenigata wouldn't really fit.
Yeah, no, it makes complete sense to me, narratively speaking, but, like, to me, it's just the place where I look at it as this is what the narrative needs him to do more than this is the completely understandable germ within the early incarnation of his character. Because, like, early Lupin is straight up a rapist. Zenigata's more just an asshole.
Yeah. And in this one, he uses his power to get sexual favors.
Whee! He's a dirty cop.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, you know, like you said, he is each man in Fujiko's life kind of represents a version of ways men and women interact in social systems, and he's the guy who tries to take advantage of women because his power allows him to do so.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, each character, except for Lupin, has something that they want Fujiko to be. They have some assumptions that they're making about her. And that affects her relationship with them. Jigen just sees her as a deceitful woman. Because
they can't be trusted.
Yeah, you can't trust women. So he doesn't trust her. And I mean, he shouldn't trust her. But,
I was going to say, is that a Jigen character type? Like, he just doesn't trust any women at all? Cause that's
yes.
not
That is established in the show
misogynist.
mythology.
Because that's not the vibe I got from this at all.
That is established
incarnation.
within the show's mythology.
Okay.
That Jigen does not.
Yeah, Jigen
like
is the jealous
women.
boyfriend who gets really angry and grumpy every time Lupin goes after a girl.
So they
that's
sort of gave
really
him
not the vibe I get from Fujiko Mine with him.
Interesting.
For me, in this version, the vibe, and again, I come at this like as someone who really doesn't know the characters that well, and I think part 4 maybe leans a little bit into everyone being kind of friendly, maybe. But I kind of saw it as like, sort of, especially early on, Lupin really sees Fujiko as kind of a treasure to obtain, and Goemon has this idea of her as this like girlfriend who kind of they can save each other with their love kind of thing. And like Vrai said about Zenigata. But for me, Jigen kind of treats everyone like a person in this show, I think. I think he and Fujiko, I think Fujiko's an asshole and Jigen's like, yo, she's an asshole and you shouldn't trust her. And I don't think he's wrong.
He's absolutely not wrong.
But then you see him later with the living portrait, and everyone around her is kind of talking about her like she's a work of art or a treasure to steal. And Jigen like immediately just treats her like a kid. He's like, this is fucked up, and tries to sort of connect with her as a human. I thought that was sweet. So I liked Jigen in this version of the show. I did not know he was a straight up misogynist based on his interactions with a couple of female characters in Fujiko Mine.
I think that, and I think it's interesting how our context, like the show's, how much we know the show's context, affects our perception. Because I definitely like, I see G and I know that he hates women historically, so it's like, well, he sees Fujiko as a woman who cannot be trusted. He doesn't see Fujiko as Fujiko.
Well, and it's interesting because like neither of you is wrong. Like, because classic Jigen is very much the archetypal He-Man woman hater. Herf, I drink the manly whiskey. And then kind of one of the things I do enjoy about latter day Lupin is Dad Jigen, which is what you kind of get in the Painted Lady episode. He is always the character who gets stuck playing dad to young or vulnerable characters. So like, and he's also one of the probably the most consistently written character across the franchise. So this is all very interesting to me.
Okay, yeah. No, that's true.
Moemon is Moemon. It is interesting to me because when he's first introduced in Green Jacket, Fujiko is pretending to be his girlfriend. So it's like an entire legacy joke, and it's good and also very cute, and I ship it.
They had to sort of start that up. And like, yeah, like you said, Vrai, he has like a hardcore, he has a whole virgin whore complex. So like, it's not that he doesn't care about Fujiko. Like when she is falling apart, he takes her in and he takes care of her, even though she literally throws the food he gives her in his face. But at the same time, he is thinking, oh, she's a wicked woman. She deceived me. I thought she was, this wonderful ideal. And actually she's kind of a whore. He wants her to be Maria. He doesn't like Fujiko. He wants Maria. And he calls her Maria even after she tells him her real name. And so he doesn't really like get to fully participate in her conclusion. The one who stays by her side and sees this thing to the end was the one who took the time to figure out what was going on, who stood beside her, who tried to like actually genuinely understand her. And he says, like, when the owls come, like, hey, what's going on? He's like, it's not about, like, trying to steal her anymore. I just, like, care about her as a person now. Everyone else, like, sees her in a certain way because of, like, their own perceptions. And Lupin, like, actually, like, takes the time to learn about who she is, to figure things out when she can't do it, and give her the help that she needs to stand back up on her feet.
Which I will admit, the first time I saw the series, my eyes rolled.
Oh, same, bit. And I think that happens to everyone because it's like, why is Lupin taking over? Why is Fujiko no longer the main character in her own story? And then, like, the twist comes, and you realize that it was all for a reason.
God, the meta story of this anime is so very good.
It. I was going to say, do you guys want to go into that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. All right. So the meta story, there's a lot there.
So it would appear the series presents itself for most of its run as being the kind of typical dark and gritty reboot where you go to an established character and give them a grim dark backstory that explains why they're doing things.
Why does she steal? What happened to her? Why is she this mysterious and beautiful character? And the theme songs support that.
Yeah, if you saw Maleficent in the past few years, or Wicked, you know exactly the series, the kind of story that we're talking about.
Right. The way my friend Nick put it, that I will have never forgotten, is the woman called Fujiko Mine asks the question, why is she like this? And then it answers the question, because fuck you, that's why.
So it turns out, it transpires at the end that Fujiko does not, in fact, have a dark and troubled past. She has somebody else's dark and troubled past. She was captured by a young woman named Aisha, who was sold as a young girl. Her father was killed. She was the property of a horrible pedophile who physically, sexually, and emotionally tortured her. And the whole experience left her, because he was trying to create his perfect maiden, and the experience left her unable to walk, but rather than, once he died, unable to, let go of her trauma or move on from this trauma, she decided to, continue to forward that trauma onto other young children, and use them as means of trying to think about the life she might have lived.
Right. And it's just there's so much there. There's just so much there. Talking about the cycle of abuse. She doesn't know what else to do but to inflict that abuse on other people and try to live vicariously through them.
And also the way that men control women's stories, and edit them and put as much trauma in them as though it will make women more deep and perfect, and then they can save them and understand how deep they are.
And when women try to get out of line, men have to bring them back into line. Luisu Almeida, Aisha, she set Lupin on Fujiko. Because Fujiko was not acting in line with what she wanted.
Right. And at the same time internalized misogyny, because Aisha is so mad that Fujiko isn't broken by these events.
Yeah.
There's so many layers.
Oh, so good. D, what do you think of the meta-narrative?
I think it's a good meta-narrative, and I appreciate it. I agree with what you guys said. I know you guys love this show, and I like it. I do. It's very good, and I appreciate it very much on a critical level. I think this is one of those shows that is just not really made for my fictional sensibilities. In that, Fujiko is an asshole, so it's kind of hard for me to root for her, especially after that school episode, which we haven't really talked about. But she does sexually assault teenagers who she's their teacher at the time. So
oh, yeah, it's bad.
It's real hard for me to give a shit after that. And I like Fujiko and the other incarnations of her that I've seen. So I came into the show with kind of a positive feeling for her. And I did not remember that school episode at all. I halfway think I maybe accidentally skipped it when I was watching this the first time through, because that really smacked into me on this watch along. And I'm not sure I'd have kept watching if I had seen that episode when it was first airing. That's how much it put me off the character. The other thing is, as much as I adore the series kind of smacking down that idea that someone needs to be traumatized in order to, be kind of an asshole or, be a thief or have casual sex with people or what have you. The fact that Fujiko doesn't have a backstory at all, she appears to have sprung fully formed from the womb, wanting to steal things, kind of is disappointing to me. As someone who likes character stories and likes to know what your history is. And the history doesn't have to be trauma, but it's what did get you into thieving? Because that's not a career. Most people don't take things from other people for fun. And I say this as someone who, 3 months before Fujiko Mine came out, had gotten burgled. And it's a terrible experience. So I'm sure I'm coming off of that as well.
No, I mean, I have had that happen too. And it was awful and traumatic. I just think, and I mean, this is not to discount what you're saying, but I always thought of it as, we don't know Lupin's backstory, we don't know Jigen's backstory, we don't know Goemon's backstory, everyone just kind of, everyone accepts them, this is who they are, we only impose the need for, I guess we kind of know Lupin's backstory, he's the grandchild of a famous French thief, but
I guess what it is for me is we get some hints about everybody else's sort of situation in this show. There's this, and again, I think this is kind of an interesting idea, is that it seems like everyone is kind of trying to escape or is bound to their past in some way. Like Lupin, Zenigata talks about how like the blood between him and Lupin means that they will always be chasing each other, and one of them will always be a thief, and one of them will always be a cop. So you have that kind of family history there. And then with Jigen, we kind of get a little bit of, like, we don't know why he became a bodyguard, but we kind of get a sense of, like, how he becomes a thief is, you know, this situation that happens with his old job. And then there's hints with Goemon that he, like, faked his own death or something and had to leave Japan. So we get these, like, hints of, like, how the other characters got to where they are. And I think it bugs me that we don't get anything really with Fujiko. So it ends up, there's a sense at the end where I like that they reject the damaged woman narrative. I wish they had given me something to hang on to, because at this point she kind of just feels like a mysterious woman to me. And I don't
see, that's interesting.
Again, that's not my style of, that's not the kind of storytelling I really enjoy. So I found it a little disappointing at the end when it was like, no, I've actually just always been like this. And I'm like, what does always mean? How did you get into that? What drew you to this lifestyle? Like, it doesn't have to be traumatic, but I wish there was something there.
Because you know, I thought that, I felt like the opposite of the show was like, that was the opposite of the message of the show, to, you know, that it was kind of smacking down this idea of, you know, she's a mysterious woman, because that had been set up over and over throughout the show, that creating this, like, sense of mystery, not just around Fujiko, but around, like, every other woman, that, you know, they're all damaged or traumatized or something or other. And then it's like, you know, so of course you expect that out of Fujiko. And then she's like, no, this is just who I am. You know, and, like, I guess I can accept that she was a girl who realized she could use her body to get what she wanted, who enjoyed using her body to get what she wanted, and and that she liked pretty shiny things, and so she was going to pursue that. Like, you know, I was willing to sort of accept that about her.
Yeah. No, and it is very interesting, because on the one hand, I can't not look at this series from a franchise perspective, where I'm sitting at, like, this is an interesting meditation on the fact that the characters are always in that comic book time eternal now, where they're the same age and design, but in 2008 they have iPhones now. That's weird and unsettling. And also, you know, there are many different origin stories, most of which are contradictory, in that kind of Killing Joke way, or the fact that there's this OVA that left me feeling kind of the same way you do about Fujiko here, which is called Green versus Red, which basically posits the idea that the reason there are so many different contradictory images of Lupin is because Lupin is more title than person, and I hated that. I hated that. Because why am I investing in them if they're not really characters with bonds that I care about? But left me kind of in a similar place to where you ended up. And I think it's, you know, obviously, I do think this series is genuinely critically good, but also I have no distance from it whatsoever. So I don't want to step over you. Because, like, on the one hand, this is very much a series steeped in franchise lore, but it's also meant to work as an intro and prequel for people. So that's a valid feeling if you felt alienated at the end.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't, it's not like it alienated me from the franchise because I then picked up Blue Jacket Lupin when it came out. So clearly there was something here that I was attached to and wanted to hang out with these characters some more. It's just one of those things. I talk sometimes in media about it functioning on both a lower and a higher level, and I kind of hate that I use those terms because it makes it sound like there's a tier to it, and I don't think there is. But what I mean by that is, like, you maybe have like a more meta or thematic level of like what the story is trying to do. And I think Fujiko Mine accomplishes that level like exquisitely well. But then you also have kind of a lower level, which to me is that if people who maybe aren't digging into those themes and are just sort of enjoying a story about characters in some kind of a world at face value. I talk about one of the reasons I like Flip Flappers so much is that it's this really nice coming of age story about these cute girls I didn't mean cute girls in that sense, about these fun girls going on adventures together and having this cute little romance. But then it also has all this thematic and metaphorical allusions and things going on this upper level that you can kind of enjoy both sides of that story. And the thing with, and again, I don't want to yuck any yums because I do think this is a good show, and this is not even really a critique. This is just like kind of a personal reaction. For me, it does not succeed as well on that lower level because I got to the end of the series and I don't really feel like I know Fujiko any better than I did at the start.
Okay, I see what you mean.
Well, it's it because I saw a lot of a more virulent version of that reaction with you mostly like long standing gatekeeping Lupin bros who were like, "What's the point? She doesn't actually have a dark and tragic backstory. This whole series was pointless." And I'm like, "No, it wasn't." But like the way you phrase it,
Right.
it makes more sense. Of like, I don't know this character,
Right, like there is a sense of who Fujiko is, but yeah, like it doesn't give us a sense of exactly what makes her tick other than that she likes shiny pretty things and she likes sex. Which,
Like, I'll be honest, every time this series has tried to do a definitive backstory, it's been bad.
I don't know. I guess like the meta level of the series just like it worked for me so strongly. Like the moment where she stands up and she says like, "This is the story of the woman called Fujiko Mine." Like it just like it was overwhelming the first time I saw that. Like it just absolutely blew me away. Like literally just like walking around my living room talking about it for like an hour afterwards. Like it hit me so hard that I honestly like I didn't even think about it anymore, about that sort of surface level, because the surface level, it is important. Like definitely, like there are shows where I have had the opposite reaction where I'm just like I'm not into this doesn't work for me, and people are like, "Oh no," but like the meta, and I'm just like, I don't care about the meta. I couldn't connect to it. So I see where you're coming from. I just, I guess it parts of it worked for me that didn't work for you, and that's fine. Like, it's okay to disagree.
I do think it's I also think it might kind of be an interest of Yamamoto's, this idea that your backstory is less important than the person you are right now and like what you do in the now, and that's who you are, because there are definitely traces of that in both Michiko and Hachin and
Right.
Yuri on Ice. But at the same time, it's not a failing to not like that kind of story structure or to find it unsatisfying. That's not a failing.
Yeah, no, like it is not a series that works for everyone, and that's fine. I know people who couldn't get.
I mean, I would, and I mean, again, do not get me wrong. I recommend this show to people. I mean, there's a lot. I think there's a lot really good going on here. I can put on my critic's hat, and we can talk about the good stuff it's doing for sure. It's just I don't think it's ever going to make a favorite list for me, and that's kind of all I meant, was just on that kind of gut visceral level of like, I'm super invested in these people. It never quite pinged that way for me. So.
Yeah.
Fair.
That's all. And again, not even really a criticism, because that's completely subjective. Just something that, you guys asked me my opinion, and then it all sort of just spilled out there at the
it's
end.
okay to disagree.
No, I'm really glad. I'm really glad that I do, of the point that like I think you have really strong actual critical opinions on. I saved talking about Oscar for last because I'm just a big old ball of feelings, but why don't we start with the school episode, because I know you want to talk about it.
I mean, I feel like I kind of already did. I think it's a really bad, off-putting episode. I think there's some interesting stuff in there, but the series seems like it really kind of glosses over what to me is a pretty awful thing that happens in terms of Fujiko sort of fucking with these teenage girls, or at least people she thinks are teenage girls. And it was just very viscerally unpleasant to me, and made it really hard for me to give a shit about what happened to her after that point.
Yeah, I don't think that's unfair. I think it is the ugliest episode of the series. I personally would also think it's one of the best in terms of what the series is doing.
Okay.
Yeah, it's definitely I don't know, I've been able to sort of accept like Fujiko's not a nice person, like what she's doing isn't right, but also like she does a lot of stuff that's not right. She also kills people.
No,
like, and
but I think there's this element in a lot of the other a lot of the other episodes where she's manipulating somebody, or she's she's threatening or being really crass with somebody who is not a good person and kind of has it coming. And these are just kids. These are teenagers at a school who are some of them are kind of shitty. But
right.
I mean, to me, it's a very different context. And I don't know if the series quite acknowledges that it's just different.
Right. No.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. 'Cause it's unquestionably wrong that she's hitting on these students and feels up Oscar, who she may or may not know is Oscar at the time. To this day, I'm genuinely unsure.
Yeah, it's really unclear.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Like, I would not argue with you on that front at all, and being off-put by it is completely understanding. It's also the episode with the rape scene, which may or may not be a penetration scene, but is still very much an assault. Which I find the framing of that really interesting. The fact that it's obscured whether or not it's a penetrative rape or if it's just, the assault of her consent and her body. I like the framing of that is very much, it doesn't matter whether real rape happened. The fact is that her control of her body was taken away from her, and that's awful.
It's really funny though when she wakes up. She kind of looks.
Yeah, that scene is also.
Her reaction seems to be more, God damn it! Did he have to make a mess?
Yeah.
Like she seems.
It is a weird
She seems
reaction.
more exasperated that he has just dumped wine all over her than the fact that he tied her up and assaulted her. Like, I don't know. Like, I had no problem accepting that as part of the ethos of the show.
It's these two characters who are foils at their mutual worsts, I think. And it's interesting how the episode, various points of the episode, at least to me, play with shifting sympathies between them as they fuck each other over in genuinely horrific ways.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think what bugs me most about that episode is everything awful that Oscar does in that episode is framed very much, but from the music to the cinematography to everything, it's framed as awful. Like you're watching it and you're cringing and it's super uncomfortable. The stuff with Fujiko and the girls, especially when the girl Oscar is pretending to be, whose name escapes me at the moment.
Isolde.
Isolde, thank you. Is framed much more as kind of like sexy and cool, and look at this relationship, look at this nice relationship they're developing. And I think that's what was off-putting to me about it, is it did not feel like they were playing that as uncomfortable.
Right.
No, that's entirely fair. Like, I don't want to speculate, but the way it's framed, it feels like it doesn't think of this as the show doesn't think of it as awful, but like as harmless and transient, which is kind of an element of queer stories I wish would go away.
Yeah.
So you're right. It
felt like the episode was kind of trying to engage with like the Class S genre, but
so much.
and Flip Flappers did it a lot better.
No, I think we can agree on that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the head student girl is Nanami, basically.
That's fair.
And it's like, yeah, but my thought, like, it is a very pretty episode. Like, it's very, very well directed, and like it has a lot of visual impact, which I think made it an easier pill for me to swallow. As opposed to like the bad Cuba episode,
which is the worst episode of the series. Yes.
So like I don't have a good reason for it not bothering me, because these are things that in fiction do tend to bother me. But it's like when we had our discussion of age differences, like, D could sort of file Tatsuya and Yui, like, you could sweep them under the rug, and while Vrai and I are like, ugh, like, it's not a logical thing. Like, sometimes you look at it and you react, and sometimes you look at it and you just sort of intellectually go, oh, that's bad, but also, I don't know.
very much what's going on here, I think, because yes, objectively you're correct. It's bad.
It's such a
It's
pretty
bad.
episode, though.
The actions on hand are bad. Oh, it's so pretty. Oh my god, I die at how pretty it is.
Also, like the scene with Fujiko and quote unquote Isolde before it turns into a rape scene is like a lot.
It's a lot. It's a lot. I really desperately need Yamamoto to direct
God,
a Yuri series
please.
about adults. I would die.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of moments in this show, which again I think maybe is why it doesn't maybe resonate with me as strongly as it could. I think there's a lot of moments in this that are very much the camera spinning to look directly at the audience that the original comic was targeted at, which is, straight men. And I think the ending theme is one of those moments. And then obviously the finale when we get Fujiko kind of also looking dead into the camera and being like, no, this is who I am. I don't care what's the line, like, no matter how many pasts you try to give me, I'm still me, something to that effect. And I think there's a lot of moments where the series kind of does that, and I think that's great. But like, when you were talking about the ending theme privately, I had not noticed that either, and the reason I hadn't noticed it is because the ending thing would come on, I'd catch one shot of an underage girl in like lingerie, and I'd go, I don't want to watch this, and would just immediately look, like I would just stop watching. I like the song, so I would usually let it run, but I'd be like looking at my phone or something. So then when you said that, I actually sat and watched the whole ending. I was like, oh yeah, this is super uncomfortable. But again, it's that element of like, who's the camera kind of looking at and pointing towards, and what audience is it directing this stuff at. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, no, definitely, it's not a subtle show, I don't think, which I think it's fair to critique it for. It's Mario Okada. It's as subtle as a brick to the face. Like,
I think sometimes that's totally okay, though.
Yeah, I mean, I think stuff like I have a one of the things that, like, one of my maxims is, even if it's ironic, it's still shit posting. And that applies to a lot of things. Even if it's ironic, it's still fan service. So you have, like, I feel like with situations like this, like, because that was one of my big issues with Tiger and Bunny, is I would be like, guys, the fan service in the show. And they're like, no, they're calling it out. It's ironic. I'm like, no, it's not. They call it out, but then
no, it's not.
But then they also like do things like showing shots of Blue Rose with her head not visible and just lingering on her body, like, so like with stuff like this, I feel like if you're going to specifically address this, like, you can't be subtle, because then, like, if the layer gets lost on some people, like, it has failed. If you are calling out fan service, then like you have to be like, hey, you like this picture of a naked lady? Well, you suck because of that.
Yeah. And it's always interesting to me because my favorite part of the show is so subtle that literally I had to start a blog to talk about it.
That is very true. Which I do believe brings us to what I think we should now call the Chichiri Hour, which is when a character when one of us talks for way too long about a character we like way too much. Vrai, would you like to talk about Oscar?
Oh my god, I love this boy. He might be my favorite anime character now, just because I've spent so long.
He sucks, though.
He does. He's a piece of shit. He's awful. He needs so much help. Please, someone help this awful boy.
He just wants Zenigata to tell him good job.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, is I think it's because we never find out how old Oscar is, but to me he reads as like 17.
Yeah, he
like
reads young. I agree.
Like very much the teenage prodigy who got through the ranks partly because of hard work, like he's genuinely smart, but also nepotism.
Yeah. Also, Zenigata basically adopted him. Yeah.
Yeah. And he is genuinely awful, but it's a combination of factors that I feel like he suffers in proportion to his awfulness throughout the series. And also, he is a child, and I can see all of the factors that produced his shittiness and gave him no options to stop being shitty. Like,
Right.
His misogyny is very, very clearly learned from Zenigata, the guy who raised him. Like, just looking at the way he treats Fujiko, the way he talks about Fujiko and other women. I wonder where he learned this.
Yeah.
And then we haven't touched on it, but this series is very definitively a period piece. It's set in the early 1960s, which is like the heyday of shock treatment and frontal lobotomies for gay people in asylums. So that's plenty of incentive for this small gay boy, alongside of his toxic masculine misogynist dad, to stomp down real hard on those feelings and just be angry at the world and angry at himself and angry at women for getting to smooch the dudes he can't smooch. And also the fact that he is also dealing with repressed memories in a way that's never overtly dealt with or addressed. And no one helps him. Nobody helps him because he's a guy and guys should be able to man up and take it themselves. So he's just, to me, his awfulness is meted out by the punishments he gets and how just pathetic and sad he is.
Do you think that the show was trying to say that he needs help and no one's trying to help him? Or like, what do you think they were aiming for?
I do. Like, I genuinely do. Because of what we know about Okada now, and just because of the way it reads, and because this is a story about stories, he is I almost stopped watching the show after Feast of Fools. I'm very lucky that I actually binged this series all at once, like right after it had finished, because I almost stopped watching when it seemed like he had fallen into the dead gays trope.
Yeah. In my memory, he did die. I had forgotten that he survives. You just have no idea what happens to him.
Yeah, and like I feel like in this show that is so very much about stories and narratives and who controls who, that's on purpose. The fact that he is not neatly shuffled off once it's no longer convenient and he's had his big tragic breakdown that's convenient to the plot. He's just at this loose end, and he's broken and sad, and Zenigata like has a brief after in the same episode where Zenigata has spent like this big two-parter talking to Fujiko and how Fujiko is so fragile now and she needs his help and he has to look after her. He makes like this one half-assed offering to his adopted son of, hey, stop, I'll help you, after he's clearly had a mental and emotional breakdown and undergone untold amounts of trauma, and it doesn't work because of fucking course it doesn't work. It's half-assed and way too late. It just feels very on point to the fact that, yeah, he was always a little shit, but if he had had options available to him, he might have turned out better.
No, I agree with that. I think the series frames Oscar as a sympathetic villain. I think he does have a villainous role to play. In a lot of scenes, he does some pretty fucking awful stuff, as we've discussed.
Yes.
But they also kind of ground him in this sense of he genuinely loves Zenigata. And
he seems to have no other relationships.
No. And so like when, and I don't just mean that in the sense like, oh, he's obsessed and possessive, which, he is also obsessed and possessive, but like when he thinks Fujiko is torturing him, like he does not hesitate to give up the case. Like he's in so much obvious anguish from that you definitely believe that, those feelings are genuine. And so, yeah, no, I agree with you, Vrai. I think the way they tell his story is really interesting and complex. I find him more interesting than Fujiko, if I'm being completely honest.
Yeah. Well, he has a full story. He has a backstory. He has a present. He has an uncertain future.
That tragic backstory.
Not just that. It's not really a tragic backstory. He has a backstory. But I think it's also the fact that we're allowed to see him not just at his worst, because we definitely see Fujiko at some of her worst moments, but I think the fact that we're allowed to see him as openly showing affection and vulnerability makes a big difference to me in terms of humanizing people. By the end of the series, I get the sense Fujiko likes Lupin. Other than when she's having a breakdown caused by false memories, which doesn't count, we never really get to see Fujiko raw, I guess.
Yeah. No, that's true. The way she kissed that screw at the end kind of gave a hint that she has some
yeah. And
I think Fujiko's the kind of character, and I think this is built into her character too, who maybe never personally lets herself get too terribly attached, because I think she does really, obviously, I think freedom and agency are a huge thing for her. So I think we don't necessarily see her openly expressing like emotional attachment because of that sense of like, well, I want to be able to go and do whatever I want whenever I want. So I get that. Again, it's just again, it's that sense of like getting a feel for who this person like really is, and Fujiko always kind of slides out of the way right before you maybe get a sense of that, which is an interesting way to write a character, but it makes it harder for me to sympathize.
So, like, the way I think she's sort of a power fantasy. I mean, she is a power fantasy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, like,
that's true.
I mean, that's definitely the way
I guess
I feel about her is like, I mean, I don't want to be like Fujiko. But like,
no, but now that you say it, I think you could make an argument that the type of story that Fujiko and Oscar have are gender swapped.
Interesting.
Yeah,
like,
I mean, I think I see what you mean.
No, I can see it. But like, I mean, that I know we were talking about Oscar, but it did like kind of snap into my head. Like, the reason
no, carry on.
we don't see Fujiko, you know, genuinely vulnerable. The reason we don't see her like in a moment of true weakness, as opposed to, you know, just falling apart because of her implanted memories, is because, like I said, she's a power fantasy. Like, they try to take the power away from her, and she takes the power back. And I think that is something that a lot of women feel like they cannot do, that they have been disempowered and they don't know how to reach for it and take it back. And they don't have the allies they need. Like Fujiko has, like, Lupin acts as a true, genuine ally to her. When she is coming apart, she doesn't have the allies they need to be able to find the ability to take that power back. So yeah, I think of Fujiko as a power fantasy. She is for me. Like, so like, and Oscar, you know, is like, you know, this tragic figure. And I think he is, you know, that part of that is he is also jealous of the power that she has.
The fact, yeah, the power the only power that she doesn't see because she didn't have to take it is this, like, this power she has as a straight woman.
Right.
Or an implicitly straight woman, if we don't include hitting on teenagers. Go on.
I mean, that scene with Isolde / Oscar, she seemed pretty into it.
Yeah, no, yeah. Well, no, absolutely, I would buy, but...
And, what's her name? Jigen's dead, sad girlfriend.
From episode 2. Yeah.
Chicholina.
Like, there were also sexual implications to that scene as well.
Oh no, absolutely, Fujiko is a bi character, but like, structurally speaking, she can move through the world.
Sure.
Like, as a...
Right. Okay.
Yeah. I will say, on the subject of Fujiko kind of being vague, there is that big old element of Oscar that doesn't get... Where the fuck did he get that tattoo?
Mm-hmm.
He has a big old honking tattoo on him.
Yeah, it keeps feeling like they're going to address it, and then they never do. But didn't you, Vrai, I think you pointed this out, isn't Oscar's tattoo very similar to the foot brands on Aisha?
Yes, I am so deep in this that I honestly can no longer tell if it's just me having a string board or if it's honestly, like, was there all, like, because I came away from the show the first time with the conclusion that, oh, this is what they were trying to tell us, obviously. But nobody else but me seemed to reach that conclusion, so I don't know anymore. But I am dead convinced that Oscar was also kidnapped and implanted with false memories, which is why he's like a weird feral child before jumping off that bridge as a kid, and why he has the tattoo that looks like Aisha's foot brands.
Yeah, it's a solid theory.
Yeah, I've read that essay. I think it's a great essay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that's a totally valid interpretation and adds a really interesting layer to Oscar's story, and how, like you said, he kind of works as Fujiko's foil, and so you get these kind of parallels between the two of them.
Well, and there's also so much gender shit with him, because like it feels like the story is talking back to narratives about gay men from the 60s and 70s in Western media, and also now, let's be real, about how, gay men just are secretly want to be women, obviously. So while Fujiko is dealing with these ideas of being a woman traumatized by men, Oscar is dealing with these memories as a man of, well, you're attracted to men, you must actually be a woman. And it's like a major part of his character.
Very Mario Okada.
Very much. And like I've toyed with the idea of, is he assigned female at birth and presenting male, which I think is interesting in certain ways, but I think the story and the themes hold better together if he's assigned male at birth and dealing with these as a these issues as a cis gay man.
Yeah, I hear that. I noticed that something that pinged on my radar when I was watching it with the dub was in that school episode. I started realizing it seemed like they were making a point of avoiding pronouns with Oscar, and then I started to kind of pay attention because they kept referring to him as the kid or that brat. And then it isn't until I think it's Feast of Fools, you said the episode is called, where with the what looks like it's going to be the tragic finale and then isn't, is when they finally start dropping like boy and he, and I'm like, okay, all right, there we go. But it seemed like they were almost intentionally keeping that vague for a while, which I thought was an interesting choice.
Yeah, well, I mean, he is named after Oscar, probably from Rose of Versailles, which, by the way, there was actually a Lupin III Rose of Versailles crossover episode. It sucks.
Oh, that's too bad.
It's really bad. It's full of no homo. Everybody thinks that Lupin is courting after a dude because Oscar, but obviously he has this sense the whole time. He knows that she's a girl, no homo. I hate that episode.
I don't blame you.
I mean, Lupin's the most bisexual man alive. What are you doing?
He does have a husband, so.
But yeah, there's so much interesting, messy gender shit going on with Oscar that you could probably write 50 billion essays, which is why I will continue to be the one-man cheer squad for this character nobody cares about. Somebody make me a figure. Those are my big, loud, messy feelings. I could continue to talk about Oscar, but like, I feel like I got all the relevant things out.
Yeah, we'll link to some tags and categories and stuff in the AniFem post that hosts this podcast. So if you are listening to this on iTunes or Stitcher or wherever else, you can go there if you want to track down some links and read some more exciting stuff on the Woman Called Fujiko Mine.
Yes, do. Yes. And I'm very excited to announce that you can actually watch this series. It was kind of lost for a while, but BRV has it.
I mean, it's on Funimation.
Oh, that's good. It's on Funimation. It's been there for a while. And since they have a deal with Crunchyroll, I'm sure it will eventually end up on Crunchyroll. It just isn't there yet.
Well, I checked recently-ish, and it's only on it's only on Funimation if you have an account. But yes, do visit it, revisit it. If you haven't seen it already and you made it to the end of this podcast, what are you doing?
Well, we just spoiled all the twists for you.
Hey, they knew. We told them before, so it's all good.
It's true.
But yeah, it's definitely a nice one that's worth rewatching because you get kind of once you know where the story is going, then rewatching it adds kind of different layers of meaning to some of the early events. So
yeah,
sure.
And it may end up not being. I don't think anybody can say it's not a smart series. It may end up not being for you because it is very tonally dark and sometimes off-putting. So, but I love it. I love it so much. I have no critical distance. Right. Any last items that you guys wanted to bring up?
It's a good series. Recommended. A little late in the game to be saying that, but yeah.
I love it.
It's very interesting. There's a lot happening. It's like you said, it's a very smart series for sure. So,
yeah. Cool. Thank you everybody for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, you can always find more episodes and watch-alongs and retrospectives on our SoundCloud page at soundcloud.com/animefeminist. We have a Patreon, which is the way that we pay the bills. It really helps. Even dollar contributions really go a long way into making sure that all of our writers and editors get paid, and so that we can do seasonal stuff like the premiere reviews, which are coming up, and there are so many shows this season.
So many.
So if you could go to patreon.com/animefeminist, we would really super appreciate that. You can also talk to us all over the internet on Facebook at facebook.com/animefem, on our website at Anime Feminist, or at www.animefeminist.com, where you can find more essays of the kind of stuff we do, or on Twitter at twitter.com/animefeminist, or on Tumblr at animefeminist.tumblr.com, which I stalk the queue for, so, like, it's real gay. Thank
As
you.
it should be.
Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.